HBCU Podcast. I'm Tommy. I'll be joined by some awesome HBCU grads in the form of co-host and guests for this podcast. Just so you know, the HBCU Podcast comes from our love for historically Black colleges and universities. Here, we'll talk about the news, share colorful commentary, and have conversations with HBCU alumni. So, welcome to the HBCU Podcast. I'm excited to have you two as a guest with me today. You're pretty much great friends of the HBCU Podcast. If people follow us on social media, they'll see that you both took over our Instagram page for your HBCU graduate school recruitment fair in February. So they might be already be familiar with you two.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, y'all.
So we have with us today, we have Aisha Bowen, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And she's a graduate of Howard University. She's currently a second-year master's student in the Penn Graduate School of Education, studying international education development. She also serves as a research assistant for the Penn Center for Minority Serving Institutions. So welcome, Aisha.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We also have with us today Mr. David Hughes. You probably remember the name because he has been a guest on the HBCU podcast, but he's a graduate of Morehouse College and Prairie View A&amp. He's also a predoctoral fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. David is a research associate for the Penn Center for Minority Serving Institutions. So welcome, David.
Thank you.
Okay, so before we get started, you guys have to give me an update on the success of the HBCU graduate recruitment fair. How did that go?
So yeah, it was a beautiful event. It was a great turnout. For those who for those who are not aware of what took place, David and I were the co-founders of this event, where we hosted it at the W.E.B. Du Bois College House on University of Pennsylvania's campus. And it was geared towards undergraduate students who are interested in going to graduate school. So the goal was to try and get as many young Black students as possible, Black and brown, all students, but specifically Black students, to learn about what's out there in terms of graduate school, professional school at HBCUs. And we had schools from all over the country, from Tuskegee all the way to Lincoln, here in Pennsylvania. So there were tons of schools that were present, tons of programs and people represented. So we had students leave with large amounts of knowledge about the process of applying to graduate school, what programs work best for them, and then connect with admissions officers. And we had alumni and current graduate students who were there. So it was a great turnout.
Nice.
Yes, it was. Just following up with what Aisha said, oftentimes at HBCUs, we tend to, it's kind of like sometimes there's tension between black graduates of historically white institutions and graduates of historically Black institutions. So one of the ways we can find common ground is to increase the representation of Black students at HBCUs. And then two, by doing that specifically at a historically white school, a lot of us don't know about HBCUs, so they only know what they heard, a lot of misconceptions. And so when they actually get to meet students who graduated from Notre Dame or from Penn and choose an HBCU for graduate school, and they tell them why they did it to those students at Penn and the other students from the surrounding campuses that came, they have a different lens on HBCUs. And so that was another reason why we wanted to do it. And also, we need more Black students at our graduate programs at HBCUs, not just undergraduate programs.
There's a stigma, if I could just say, that a lot of people have about HBCU graduate school program that I think is really grounded in white supremacy and all of its many factors. So this was a great way to help debunk a lot of those misconceptions and preconceived notions about graduate school for HBCUs. A lot of them are like interested in wanting to come after they graduate, start from freshmen all the way to those who are seniors who are taking a break after graduating. So we're really excited to see the possibilities in future HBCU students from Penn.
But did you guys have anything else you wanted to share regarding the success of the HBCU graduate recruitment fair?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Aisha, but that was either the highest or second highest attended event at Du Bois Hall. So for those who don't know, Du Bois Hall is the only Black dorm on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania. So oftentimes we have this notion where Blacks who go to a different school don't necessarily support HBCUs or look down on them. While sometimes that is the case, there's also the reverse where a lot of them would have went to HBCUs or just didn't know about HBCUs and still want to come. I remember specifically it was a dude who, Asia knows his name. Both his parents went to Tennessee State.
Oh, Montel.
Yes, and he was like, "Man, I want to go to an HBCU, specifically Tennessee State. I wish Tennessee State could have been here." So there's not always this divide. There is a divide, but sometimes it's not always there. Sometimes you do have a lot of students who would like to come back to an HBCU specifically for grad school. However, I think we have to do a better job of opening our arms and welcome them and not, looking down on them or thumbing our nose up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just want to give hats off to you guys. I know when I spoke to David, he was telling me a lot about the graduate recruitment fair. And I was like, that's a really great idea. So I love that you guys are doing so much work still related to HBCUs while you're working with the Penn Center for Minority Serving Institutions. And I guess that, of course, that work goes hand in hand. But I will say with the Instagram takeover, people really enjoyed you guys showcasing the individuals that you did. You had, the young lady who went to Notre Dame and then she went to Howard for law school, and people need to see that. They people also commented and shared or have still been sharing, because I added it to the highlights portion of the Instagram page, but about the young lady who received, what was it, $3 million in scholarships?
Oh, yeah, Ariana. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I just really want to say thanks, and I greatly appreciate you guys highlighting and showcasing and taking the HBCU podcast into that event to really showcase all of the great talent that's, at our HBCUs.
That was all David. David was the IG professor now.
Asia's gas and stop it.
Okay, so now that we're past that, I have been waiting to have you two on the podcast to talk about something that I thought was really awesome. So I was introduced to the both of you even prior to David being a guest on the podcast after reading a blog post on MSI's Unplugged blog, which is for the Penn Center for Minority Serving Institutions, and it was dispelling the myth of the Black Ivy League. And the two of you basically had dialogue that was captured on there, and I thought, oh my gosh, this would be great to have both of them on the podcast to talk a little bit more about this topic. So we're just going to dive right into it. Whoever wants to, take the lead first, do so. But tell the listeners about what the quote unquote Black Ivy is.
Dave, you want to start?
Okay, yes. I forget these two dudes' names. It's these two white dudes who were at Harvard at the time, and they wrote they wrote this study and they coined the term, or they created the term, the Black Ivy Leagues, and they used quote unquote prestigious metrics to say these 5 or 6 HBCUs have value. They're the quote unquote Ivy League, and while the other ones do not. Then there's a book called Our Kind of People, written by Otis Graham, and I think second or third chapter in there, he talks about, Otis Graham is also a Black dude who went to Harvard, who talks about there's only 5 schools that matter: Morehouse, Howard, and Spelman. Then beneath them are Tuskegee and Hampton.
Hampton.
Yeah, and if you got to go to HBCUs, those are the only ones that matter. But all of these people who created this term basically have a European white supremacist ideology. And what that's done is seep over into, quote unquote, the Black Ivy schools, and it's really created a divide that's not necessary. Asia and I joke about it. I graduated from Morehouse. I said, I can't tell you how many white people I ran into that pronounced it Morehead. Or what's Morehouse? Oh, I've never heard of that. Where is it? And this is being Atlanta Airport.
Wow.
Atlanta Airport is named after the first Black mayor of Atlanta, who was a Morehouse graduate, but you still don't know what Morehouse is. You think it's Morehead. Oh, that's a school in Kentucky. I think I've heard of that. So oftentimes we feel like our schools we want to be the good Black people, or not just the Black people. There's good Blacks and bad Blacks, and that's essentially what we do when we subscribe to the quote unquote Black Ivy myth. And so that's what Asia and I wanted to talk about, specifically because we attended the schools that they say are quote unquote Black Ivies.
Right. And in addition to that, this Negro Ivy League term is so problematic because it is an implicit comparison between Ivy League schools and Black schools, right? So just looking at like the grammar of the word, Negro Ivy League, the root of it is Ivy League. And the history of an Ivy League, for those who don't know, it's a league of schools that was an athletic league that included Harvard, Cornell, Columbia, Princeton, Brown, Penn, and Dartmouth. Right? It's not even, its origins are not even in anything that has to do with academics. But since its inception, it has shifted into something that has had a white elite meaning behind it. So when you talk about, the Ivy Leagues, that's where that comes from. And then to there attach the word Negro to it, right, means that these schools are an offset or a branch of the best white elite. Right. So when we talk about Negro Ivy League, yes, we're talking about those Black schools that are the best, quote unquote. But there's also this implicit comparison that you're never going to be as good as what these white schools are. And we have to look at the roots of the word, like David said. The folks who had the origins in creating this term were people who never worked at, taught at, nor attended an historically Black college or university.
Mm-hmm.
They were people who were trained by, taught by, worked at the same institutions that, are the root of what this term is. So, yeah.
Gotcha. So interestingly enough, I didn't know what you just shared about Ivy Leagues being kind of the term being based around athletics. But if they had taken that same approach with the whole, again, I'm using quotes also, Negro Ivy League, Black Ivy League, then we would have been focused more so on sports. But we haven't. It's based on how they perform academically instead.
Right. It has since morphed into when you think of Ivy League and you ask a general person off the street, like, what is an Ivy League school? They automatically associate it with academics,
mm-hmm.
right? Nobody thinks about Ivy League as an athletic league, but that's when we talk about being uninformed, that's what it is.
Gotcha.
That's a very nice way to put it. Uninformed.
So,
Yeah.
from the research that you both have conducted on this topic, do you? It's obvious that you deem the term Black Ivy problematic, but why do you think that this term is still floating around in the HBCU community? And what exactly is it that we can do to, of course, inform more people of its meaning and the fact that it probably just doesn't need to be used at all in this space?
I'll say this. A lot of people don't want to stop using the terms. And so that's problematic by itself.
Right.
So I think when you, Harriet Tubman had a line where she said, I could have freed, she's like something to the effect of, I could have freed a lot more slaves had they known they were slaves. So not everybody wants to associate themselves with something that's just Black. So if you associate something with white or what is deemed as the best, the quote unquote Ivy League, that's like a badge of honor for them. So some people like the term, right? But when you do that, that's a specific divide. Meaning my education is better than yours. But we're all Black at the end of the day. That's why I said some people want to be the good Blacks versus the bad Blacks.
Mm.
So I think it starts with the first educating, coming to the realization that they all view us the same. Whether you're at Howard, you're at Southern, you're at Grambling, you're at Prairie View, you're at Fisk, we're all Black colleges. So I don't get any extra privileges because I graduated from Morehouse. It's good, it's quote unquote looks prestigious, but there's just as many smart people at Morehouse as there are at Albany State. And oftentimes the scholars or the quote unquote scholars who write about HBCUs have never visited or attended one. So for myself, for example, although I graduated from Morehouse and Prairie View, I've also attended about 5 to 6 other HBCUs during my time. So I've been in the classroom at Florida Memorial, Texas Southern, Prairie View, Clark Atlanta, Spelman, and I've seen firsthand seen the difference of knowledge. There's smart people at Florida A&M, just like at Morehouse and Spelman. They just went to a different school. So when I say we as a quote unquote Black Ivy League try to exalt ourselves over other people, that does a disservice to the whole community. Because while we're trying to quote unquote have tiered education, white people don't look at us as tiered education. They look at us as Black schools, and I think that's really problematic.
Yeah. And I would also say people use the term within and outside of both the HBCU community because they feel like adding on the word Ivy League adds some type of, like David said, a prestige to it, right? But what's the oxymoron about it all is that when you're comparing, right, there's automatically a negative comparison. And when you look at the foundation, and the ethos of historically white institutions and historically Black institutions, they're not the same.
Mm-hmm.
And as an individual who went to Howard and as somebody who's at Penn currently, like the ways in which classes are shaped, in which like students are empowered and taught is very different. So people use that term as a form of like they try to use it as a positive thing, and a lot of them are not trying to be offensive, but it is for those of us who are informed. So we have to do
informed is the new woke, Aisha.
Yeah, informed is the new woke. Okay. It is like
I like that.
If I could use an example, like Howard has an annual. I don't know if they still have it, but when I was there, they had an annual Howard Harvard debate. Right. And there used to be there was a lot of tension around it because people call Howard all the time the Black Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of us who informed, which were a lot of Howard students, we were offended by that because we are who we are in our power, in our strength, and in our intellect solely outside of whiteness. We are powerful And we have HBCUs in general have created hundreds and thousands of intellects outside of anything that white people have ever done and white institutions have ever done, right? So we gotta do a better job at informing our brothers and sisters inside HBCU communities and outside about what this word means.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And reading you guys' blog post, again, this is conversation that the two of you had between one another. I think the term kind of puts us in these caste systems that we like to create for each other, where there's black elites and then there's the others. And even in your article, you mentioned that this refers to, an affluent black community or individuals who may have gone on to be a part of an affluent black community, i.e. the Huxtables from The Cosby Show, or the Bankses from The Fresh Prince, even the Johnsons on what's currently airing Blackish. So how do we continue to pull these people apart from there? Because it's interesting. I just watched an episode that on Blackish, excuse me, that was, just about HBCUs in general. But Dre, of course, is, a Howard graduate, and Howard again is being, put into what this quote unquote Black Ivy. So how do you think this is still playing out? Because this is a recent show. This show, Blackish, has been on the air for, I think, about 3 years now, and can currently be seen by, students who might be in high school and going towards college or looking towards college. So how do we start educating and informing these individuals right away? Because it looks like these shows that are on the mainstream are continuing to highlight what we're trying to dispel.
To put it in layman's terms, it starts in the home. Like kids, it starts in home, and then it's confirmed, or it's also taught in schools. So from students who have low socioeconomic status all the way to students who are super affluent, right? When they are, and we're speaking more so about affluent kids, but all of them, when they go throughout, their tenure, K through 12, and they're taught about, the best of the best, HBCUs are often not even in the conversation at all. Let's be clear about that. Okay?
Right.
The majority of of students throughout the country are not really introduced to HBCUs, besides the ones in the South and on the East Coast. There's a whole nother coast where a lot of us are not getting informed. So we need to show people that we exist, right? Not just assume that people know who we are. And that's crazy. Everybody should know who we are.
Right.
All of the HBCUs, but they don't. The reality is that they don't. Right? So that's A. And then B, when we present these schools, we have to be very, very mindful of how we present them. Right? And come at it from a vantage point of all these schools are great.
Absolutely.
Right? Some schools have more expertise than others in certain fields, and that's perfectly fine, just like any school. Some schools are better at nursing, some are better in, humanities, etc. But in terms of their value, they're all valuable. And that is not the story, the narrative that's been translated largely. And because of why the systems that have been in place, like Black Ivy League, right? That it's like something that we have to change our narrative, and it starts with us being informed. So, yeah.
David, what you got? Oh, there you are.
to add on to what Aisha said, once you actually are informed on the data, you have to be honest with yourself. And so I think sometimes when you when you tell people HBCUs only 3% of all colleges and they've created the entire Black middle class, people will say, well, why do I still need to go there?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no matter what, it's a delicate dance. No matter what you do or what you produce, you're still going to be looked down as less than. So I was talking to somebody who graduated from a quote unquote Black Ivy, and I was telling them, I said, hey, Cheney has a really, really good program where if you go there if you have a certain type of GPA, you get a full ride there. I said their honors program has one of the, I think, the highest graduation rate, employment rate, retention rate of any honors program in the nation.
Mm-hmm.
Then once you graduate, you get to go to any professional school in the state of Pennsylvania for free. So essentially, you're graduating undergrad debt free if you maintain a certain GPA once you get to honors college. Then you go to get your JD, your law degree, your medical degree, your PhD, whatever degree you want for free. So I said, if I would have known about that, I would apply to Cheney instead of Morehouse. And so the person, no, if I could have no debt and become a medical doctor, a lawyer, a PhD, get an MBA, whatever I want to do for free, why wouldn't I take advantage of that?
Absolutely.
And so sometimes I believe we think clout or quote unquote prestige pays bills, and it doesn't. So that's what we have to get away from, the notion of, well, my school is more prestigious than your school. Okay, well, what does your bank account look like? Because I could go to Prairie View and graduate and be an engineer and make $70,000 out of undergrad, but you graduated from Fisk and you're making $30,000. So that's what we have to, I would say, wrestle with. All schools are important, right? Just like all family members. You might have a favorite family member, but all family members are important.
So let me ask you this, though. I know we're talking about dismantling the term, not using it or whatever, but is it the responsibility of the institutions that have been deemed a part of this Black Ivy? Because honestly, I personally, even being a graduate of Claflin University, I hadn't really heard the term until later, probably even after graduation. So it's not something that we necessarily use in our area, and it could be said that's because we're not listed as one of the schools, apparently. But is it the responsibility of the schools that belong to this phantom group to not use the term anymore?
Asia and I, we talked about this. I never heard that term in the classroom or from an administrator. It was always from people from the outside.
Ever. Like, that's not a thing. Like, at Howard, like, now, it is important to also understand that there's a difference between elitism and pride. And David and I talked about this in our
break
blog,
that down.
You know what I mean? Like, all of us will go hard for our HBCUs, and that's a part of the culture, right? Like, my sister went to Spelman. I went to Howard. So we go to bat for our institutions every time we link up. But that doesn't mean that, I think that I'm better than her or that she thinks that she's better than me. It's just like, we know who we are in the greatness of our institutions, because that's what they taught us, right? Through both formal and informal education. So, let's be clear about the difference between those two things. But to your question, yes, when I think that we need to do a better job, if we hear it, of stopping using the term, period. And then when folks do say it, HBCU, the quote unquote Black Ivy students who may be in the room need to address it, right? Which I have done on multiple occasions here at Penn. Because, if you hear it from the horse's mouth, sometimes, even though it's problematic altogether, but if you hear it from the horse's mouth that, like, oh, this is problematic and you think that it is, okay, then maybe it is. And not that should change whether you say it that it's wrong and you're from Claflin and I say it and I'm from Howard. It has the same validity, right? But people who are uninformed may not believe that.
Right.
So we have to do a better job at when we do hear it and when we see it, talking about it and informing folks and being like, nah, don't use that on me, and this is why.
This is kind of a, I guess, hypothetical. But if in fact we were to consider HBCU Ivies, HBCU Ivy League. Much like the white or PWIs, what exactly are the things that fall or constitute these Ivies? Is it distinguished alumni? Is it alumni giving? Is it in the university's endowment? Like, exactly what factors go into this?
So in Otis Graham's Our Kind of People book, he said that the reason why Tuskegee and Hampton were below the other schools is because they started off as institutes and they weren't universities. So it goes back to the whole W. Du Bois, Booker T. So because you, quote unquote, worked the land or you had skills and trades and an education, that makes you below somebody who essentially has just education. Mm. And from his perspective, that's where it comes from. Now, the people who wrote the original article, they did it by graduation, retention, things like that. However, every HBCU is different. So Morehouse is a private school, Howard is a private school, Spelman is a private school. Private schools tend to have higher entrances as far as GPA, SAT. So the schools that have the bigger endowments and have harder admission standards usually have the best graduation rate, retention rate. Also, the people who go to a Howard, Spelman, Morehouse, not all of them, but they oftentimes have a lot more affluent class that goes to those universities. So there's a direct correlation between a student's socioeconomic status and if they're able to graduate in 4 years or not. Mm-hmm. So if you basically get some Cosby kid who has money for a tutor, comes from a good school, you put them at a college at, let's say, a Hampton, they should graduate 4 years as opposed to somebody who has less money. It's usually going to take them longer. So it doesn't matter what school they go to, the person with the higher socioeconomic status usually graduates on time as opposed to not. Now, if you get a majority of the people who have money and who have already better grades, if you get them at one school, they should have a better retention rate, graduation rate, all those other things. And so that's kind of where they use the two terms. So they did it based off of people who had a farm and taught trades and education versus people who just taught education. But to me, it should be the opposite. Having the food desert, knowing how to grow your own food, preparing your own meals, all that stuff is very, very, very important. And if you just have a degree and you don't have a skill or trade, it's kind of hustling backwards.
Yeah. And again, we got to go back to, the history of these quote unquote Black Ivy Leagues and the original folks who came to the schools, right? Like the original folks who came to Howard when it was first founded were majority Black elite, right? And that in itself has that legacy has carried itself forward. So, just, reiterating what David has said, we have to think about the resources that have come in it, like in relation to the socioeconomic status of the students and how, those funds have been appropriated and all those types of things. So.
Gotcha. So here's another question I have for you guys. I was speaking to someone not too long ago just about HBCUs. I think I was mentioning in the podcast, I was an advocate, for HBCUs. And this person in particular was a faculty member at an HBCU. That person will not be named, but she mentioned that she has an issue with HBCUs, not necessarily the schools, just the fact that we kind of separate or have a designation as historically Black colleges and universities. And so since we're discussing HBCUs and then the quote unquote Black Ivy, I wanted to ask you guys about your feelings regarding HBCUs versus PWIs, not even versus, but the fact that some people believe there's some separatism happening with the term HBCUs versus all the other colleges that exist. What are your thoughts?
I'm really sorry.
You go, Asia.
I'm like,
I know you're ready to go in.
yeah, like
I love it. Y'all are ready.
no, but like I'm curious as to does this professor understand the reasons why HBCUs were created? First of all,
she very well should. She is a Black woman.
Okay, so in the sense of why they're here, that's why. Because we were not allowed to go to white schools. We weren't, you know what I mean? Like that's very basic. And the majority of Black people, even though Black people throughout the diaspora, right, attend HBCUs, but a large number of these
and have been since the beginning of the inception,
right,
of HBCUs.
Right. And a lot of us have gone through struggle and strife in this country where our history has tried to be stripped and torn away from us. And people have tried to take it and say and dilute it or take it away and kind of deplete the strengths of who we are. HBCUs are indelibly one of the largest factors in the education of Black people in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So why wouldn't you want these institutions to still be here? Why wouldn't you want them to say, this is who we are and this is our legacy? Because without them, she wouldn't be here. Without them, without HBCUs, I wouldn't be at Penn. So there is a difference. There is. But that doesn't mean that we have to be separatists. Being different and coming from different histories doesn't mean that we're separatists. Right. And that is the danger of people who are in this anti-HBCU rhetoric, is that they think that because HBCUs exist, we don't want to also be a part of the larger Black community, but HBCUs are the Black community.
Mm-hmm.
That's factual. And then I always refer to quote unquote PWIs as historically white institutions because that's specifically what they are. Predominantly white can change and come. There's historically Black HBCUs that are predominantly white, but we don't refer to those HBCUs as PWIs. So it's almost like a psychology. No, the historically white institutions. Historically white institutions wouldn't even let women go to their school. So if you look at the creation of a lot of these schools, it was specifically for white men, but we don't call those institutions historically white male institutions, right? So when they created them, they're historically Black. That's essentially what they are. So why would you want to even remove that? Because when you remove that, it's removing cognitive dissonance. You don't want to be reminded of, it's like everybody wants to brush away slavery. Well, why do we need HBCUs? How could you work in education and say, why do Black people need their own space when K-12 is selling them? The colleges, the historic white colleges that they go to are selling them. Why would you don't ask Jewish people that? You don't ask Catholic people that. Black people are the only group that has to ask, or their own people ask themselves, why do we need a space for ourselves?
Mm.
And it's very frustrating, specifically when it comes from somebody who has your faith but not necessarily your values.
Right. And also, HBCUs are not only for Black people. It is a university. So anyone can come. And they are very much so embraced.
I just said we have two HBCUs that are predominantly white. You name me a historic white institution that's predominantly Black.
Mm.
So which one is it? From the beginning, if you look at Tuskegee, Booker T was getting people from Jamaica, Liberia, all different continents of Africa to come. So when you look at HBCUs, not only do we look out for the Black Americans, we are really Pan-Africanists. So when you are trying to say, why do we still need to exist? Why do we do that? It's like you're cutting your nose to spite your face. HBCUs
created the entire black middle class. As of right now, there's like over 100 black student union groups protesting all across America at their white institutions. They'll protest, but that professor will never address those issues. Mm. So if you go to Cornell, you can just Google, see what their issues are. Whatever black student union there is on a historical white campus, just go and see what the issues is. Then ask yourself, why do we need HBCUs?
I love what you said, and I need to make a concerted effort to refer to them moving forward as historically white institutions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's who it's created for. It's created for white men, not even white women.
Yeah. Absolutely.
A lot of women were not allowed. They wouldn't even let women vote. So how y'all gonna vote? Y'all definitely couldn't go to school. So yeah, the historically white institutions, but they call them predominantly. But predominant, that changes.
And we can also even dip into the women's colleges conversation, mm-hmm. right? Like, what was the purpose of women's colleges? Your Bryn Mawrs, all women's colleges, Smiths, and what were they? What was the purpose of their creation? It was to serve a population of folks who were kept out from white male, historically white male institutions. Mm-hmm. But when you talk about their history and their legacy and the power and the prowess and intellect that has come from those schools, you want to keep those, right? Because you want to continue to progress the power of women. But when it comes to HBCUs, it's a different conversation. And we have to think about why is it a different conversation. We know why.
It's a different it's a different conversation because of the type of it's a different education. Carter G. Woodson said basically when he graduated from Harvard, it took him about 20 years to unlearn everything he learned at Harvard. Basically, taught him things that weren't necessarily best for his community. And sometimes our black people have to get deprogrammed because I guarantee you that professor wouldn't ask that about Agnes Scott, an all-women's college in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. Saying, well, why do we need Agnes Scott? We have Spelman. Why can't they just go to Georgia Tech or Emory?
Now, you guys have brought up so much great information just around this topic, around HBCUs, around historically white institutions. I'm curious to know, because I'm sure you guys have a large group of friends and colleagues, and what have been, I guess, the craziest things you've heard surrounding this topic, whether it be the one around HBCUs and historically white institutions, or if it's just Ivy Leagues and the quote unquote Black Ivy League amongst your friends, your colleagues, your alumni. What is the craziest thing you've heard?
Do you have all night?
Crazy.
Yeah.
I thought the craziest thing I've ever heard was that Howard was there in the Morehouse. And I thought that was a crazy thing.
Oh, okay.
I've ever heard.
I don't want to have to hold you two back, all right?
Oh. I'm not even gonna that we trying to dispel the myth, baby. We trying to dispel the myth. No. But seriously, I think some of the craziest things that I've heard have been more so HBCUs in general in Ivy League schools, and the comparison between the two, and that if you attend HBCUs and are not interested in, don't have access to, or whatever, Ivy League institutions, white schools in general, historically white schools in general, but specifically Ivy Leagues, then there is almost an inevitable glass ceiling. Like, you cannot reach the pinnacle of success that you could if you were to go to an Ivy League school. Mm-hmm. And I think that is so wrong. Like, when you look at, and David could probably spit 15, 20 names at us right now, like some of the giants in terms of medicine, law, the humanities, politics, the church, education, a lot of them, the ones that we coined, that we name today, were educated solely at our school, at HBCUs. So I spent a lot of time having to figure out if it's even worth my breath to talk to people about it, and B, like, to dispel that, like, just because you go to an HBCU does not mean that you won't have access to the same opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. When I was intern for ESPN in undergrad, Southern graduate was the one who hired me. And so I always tell people that example where you think if you're tight, cream always rises to the top. If you're tight, you're essentially going to make it regardless of where you're at. So I think Asia and I, we talked to this one board member of an HBCU, and he was almost anti-HBCU, but the interesting part is he was on the board of an HBCU. So I'm not going to say which school, and he's a very prominent, well-to-do person in the city, but he had almost like a negative view, and he was on the board.
Yeah.
So I'm like, man, if you're on the board and you have this type of view of HBCUs, and you're on the board of your alma mater, I can only imagine how you would try to restrict the president from advancing the HBCU if you don't even think that much of it yourself.
Right.
And so that's where I go back to cognitive dissonance. It doesn't matter that this person makes over probably $200,000 a year, is very influential. None of that matters. Sometimes we just value white as right, and white is better regardless. It doesn't matter that, Penn will say, oh, we've had 7 billionaires, but they haven't produced a black one. And it doesn't matter that the white schools are good for white people, but when you look at what they do for black people, it doesn't measure up to the 3% of HBCUs. And so when you tell people that and look at that, they still don't care. They want that access to whiteness because they think access to whiteness is going to elevate them. That's not always the case.
Yes. Boom. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say what you say about the board member, because having worked at an HBCU and do a lot of things related to my HBCU, I've heard the same thing from individuals who are, I guess, what you would think as stakeholders, with that particular university. And it's like, that's interesting. That's the way you feel. And yet here you are, serving on our board or on this special committee that's supposed to be for the advancement of this university. So that's really interesting that you mentioned that.
The latter part of our blog just kind of summarized everything, and it was just like, okay, look, realistically, not every black student in the world is going to be able to go to an HBCU, right? Like, that's just not what's going to happen. But there needs to be, in all of these spaces, there needs to be a shifting in how we talk about schools that are not HBCUs and non-HBCU spaces. And it doesn't need to be from a deficit lens.
Right.
There needs to be it needs to be a shift. And until we have that shift, the powers that be are going to have this voice that says that we are less than. So how do we do that? We have to get into positions where we can shift that narrative. Those who are informed and those who, are going to go into the professoriate and are going to be in K through 12. Those who are going to do service and, do HBCU podcasts and have their own, organizations and businesses, so that we can get the word out. Because until we are in those spaces and can become the dominant voice, it's going to continue to be a struggle.
Absolutely. What is it that you think that we could do, I guess, to further not just our particular institutions individually, but overall the HBCU brand, if that makes sense? Because again, how they're talked about in these spaces that are outside of the HBCU community, that's very, very important because our HBCU community, as 100 or so colleges, that's small compared to the number of colleges and universities that are not designated HBCUs. So what is it that you think we all can do, whether or not you're a graduate or not, just, person who supports and respects the reason that these universities were created? What can we do to better inform people and increase the HBCU brand?
Well, one of the things that I started to do is I wrote children's books. So everything starts with the youth. So if you are in any fraternity, sorority, organization, make sure that that fraternity, sorority organization adopts an HBCU policy. HBCU policy meaning y'all go and visit an HBCU, y'all have a guest speaker from an HBCU, y'all study an HBCU, watch Hidden Figures, something that has an HBCU policy. Also, I'm not the only person who has a children's book about HBCUs, but find a book about HBCUs and read it at the elementary, middle school level. Also, try to research facts individually when you come and meet somebody. I know that's kind of, I pause when I said that because it's kind of hard, because unless you're in education, I really don't expect you to, not to understand, but to have the numbers and to advocate for attending HBCU if you're an account major or a business major or something like that else. So maybe we can create like a pamphlet or like a little cheat sheet or something like that and just give to people so we actually know the data and the stories. And also, I would just say read, because there's a lot of, quote, not prestigious HBCUs that have really led the way forward for our civil rights. If you look at Major Evans at Alcorn, you look at Ella Baker at Shaw University, which created the whole Student Nonviolent SNCC committee. So without Shaw, you don't get a Stokely Carmichael and you don't get a Julian Bond. And so that's very important that we take the time to research all HBCUs, not just ourselves, because all of us have value, not just some of us.
Yeah, I agree. In addition to that, I would say become involved, like serve. If you are in a city or in an area that has an HBCU, like try and serve and be a part of HBCU fairs or become a part of some type of initiative to where you can get the word out. Mm-hmm. Create opportunities like David and I did, for students who don't have access to HBCUs readily. And then I'll also say, like, donate, whether that be your monetary or donate your time, donate your resources. We are some of the most diverse folks in the world. We are the most diverse, and we have so much knowledge. And there are ways that we can connect all of our gifts and all of our talents in a way that empowers a historically Black university and empowers a Black student to go to one. So, use that unique gift to connect to students in a unique way and serve an HBCU. So.
Oh, and lastly, if you don't know anything about HBCUs, just ask somebody that you think would know, and then have that person connect those persons. Because oftentimes it'll be somebody who has never been on campus, doesn't know anything, and they'll say, well, I would choose University of Kentucky over, let's say, FAMU. But they don't know that University of Kentucky has probably one of the worst Black graduation rates in the nation. Mm. So research, or if you don't know, just ask somebody who you think can know. And then just connect those people.
Nice. Okay. Well, you guys, thank you so much for your time. I'm encouraging everybody to listen to this particular episode. You should share it. You should dialogue with your friends about it. You should dialogue with your family about it. Pretty much everybody you know, because again, we are really trying to advance what people think of HBCUs and again, outside of the HBCU community. So clearing up the misconception or the myth of HBCUs and some of the problematic things, getting rid of this term Black Ivy. That's all of the things we really want to do, and we were hoping to accomplish with this particular episode. So hopefully everyone is enjoying that. I just wanted to uplift a few organizations that if you don't have information about HBCUs, this is a start. Again, David and Aisha both mentioned that do your research on HBCUs. Of course, you're not going to find everything about HBCUs in one place, but that's the beauty of researching. You get to learn more and find more and educate yourself and inform yourself in the process. But UNCF is a great place to start. United Negro College Fund, the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. If you're HBCU Alliance, they have them in various parts of the country that is connecting HBCU alumni in that particular area. So connect with them. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority launched their national campaign, Think HBCU. So they're doing a lot of... That's right. They're doing a lot to uplift HBCUs. The Chapman Foundation does a HBCU tour. There's so many different organizations that are really trying to continue to keep HBCUs lifted and encouraging individuals to go there. And even if you didn't go there, just make sure you support them. So did you guys have any organizations or anything you wanted to add to that particular list?
That was a pretty good list.
That's great.
Also, if your organization is not on the list, create one. Create an initiative, and I think that would be the best way to continue doing that. HBCU graduates are everywhere, so if your organization was not initiative.
Yeah, and then connect with us on social. Again, I don't think I push enough to continue this conversation on social media, but if you're listening at this particular time, go to Twitter at the HBCU Podcast. Shout out whatever particular organization that you think we should also add to our list. We at the HBCU Podcast will pull together a list. We have a blog, so check that out, and we'll compile all of the information that was shared here. So connect with us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram at the HBCU Podcast, and there you'll also find information about today's guest.
Oh, real quick, shout out to my guy Travis for HBCU Pride Nation. So if you're on social media a lot, you don't necessarily want to research, kind of want to be lazy.
Yeah.
HBCU Buzz and HBCU Pride, those are kind of like the go-to. They'll always highlight a different university or a school, and then just give you facts about the prominent alumni. So if you kind of want to do like a Cliff Notes version, go to those two. In-depth, go to the websites and organizations that Natasha named.
Yes, absolutely. Please go there. And we wanted, just shout out everybody who's doing something, lifting HBCUs up. That's a lot of the people I forgot on the list because they're not, official organizations. But just like David said, there's so many people on social media who are really uplifting HBCUs, HBCU Pride Nation. He mentioned HBCU Buzz, HBCU Digest. Just use the hashtag HBCU and you'll be connected with tons of stuff. I think Campus Lately is another really great one on social media. Also, HBCU Times is a publication that actually has a second issue out right now, and they have information related to HBCUs. But so the list goes on. There's no excuse why no one should be educated or informed again about HBCUs.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to round this out, where can everybody find you all, or is there anything that you two are doing that you want to really highlight and draw attention to?
I'm graduating.
Whoop whoop.
No, seriously. I am graduating May 12th, 9 a.m. At the Palestra. If you're in Philadelphia, be there. Let's show out.
Hey, there you go, AB.
Right. So that's something I want to highlight. It's been a long time. But you can find me on Instagram at smile_AISHA. That's how you spell my name. Smile_Asia.
And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at David C. Hughes 2. Currently, I'm working on a partnership with a SEC school and an HBCU for an internship program, and that'll probably be coming out probably in the fall. So I can't speak too much about which school it is, but definitely working on a partnership between two universities to increase female representation in a certain industry.
Nice.
HBCU female representation in a certain industry.
Okay, and then don't you want to shout out a special HBCU book that you have?
Oh, yeah, Benny. Yeah, Benny Becomes an Architect. Thank you. See, that's why I mess with you. Yeah. So if you have not, you can purchase my book, children's book, Benny Becomes an Architect. It highlights architecture, but more specifically, it highlights Morgan State and the great things that their alumni have accomplished in 150 years of its inception. You can go to Amazon.com and just type in Benny Becomes an Architect, or go to mascotbooks.com and type in Benny Becomes an Architect, and you can purchase it right there.
Nice. Well, congratulations, Asia, on graduation.
Thank you.
Yes. And then congratulations, David, on, of course, the book and the partnership opportunity that you have coming up. And I also want to say thank you guys so much for being so supportive of the HBCU podcast.
Of course. Thank you for this platform, sis. It's beautiful.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We have so much more HBCU content on the way, so make sure you subscribe to the podcast, rate the podcast, and visit us at thehbcupodcast.com. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the HBCU Podcast. Like us on Facebook. I love you for listening. Until next time.